If you're looking at the future, I think you kind of got to look at the dark future of it all.
This is the world as it exists today.
If you look at all the things that could take us out, overpopulation, climate change, planet overheating, maybe AI emerges but is used as a weapon.
Science fiction can be a metaphor for the human's darkest side.
I need you to know me.
To me, a dystopian story is a warning.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
You realize that's absolutely terrible. Let's not let that happen.
Your move, creep.
Not every advancement is going to be used to better society. It's human nature. There are evil people in the world.
Where is she taking them?
Some people's dystopia can be someone else's utopia.
Surviving can be much more of a burden than a blessing.
Damn you all to hell!
Why are we so fascinated with these dark futures?
It's who we are in our intimate rage and our social rage. So the angst that we have is really the fear of the end of humanity.
You know, with nuclear energy and the potential for pathogens and so on, all the things that we've been dealing with for the last, 50, 60 years are manifesting in these post-apocalyptic fantasies. And I would submit that everybody that watches these movies believes that they are going to be that 1 in 10 million people that survives and has the apartment, in Manhattan with the steel door and all that. Sure, you got to shoot a few vampires, but it's actually a pretty good life.
It is. It simplifies the lifestyle. And at the end of the day is the fantasy of having to hunt to survive. I mean, the quintessential fantasy in the 20th century for post-apocalyptic is you, your car, and your gun.
I had been aware of I Am Legend for years. Arnold Schwarzenegger had it for about 10 years, and he wasn't letting it go. And I was like, come on, man, come on. You the governor, man, you're not gonna make it. And eventually Arnold was like, okay, I'm not gonna make it. Dr. Robert Neville, he was a virologist, and he was supposed to save humanity, and he missed.
There has been a worldwide epidemic, and it has turned the population into these vampire and zombie-like things. And Neville is the last man on Earth.
What will the world look like after we have finally found a way to make sure it has rid itself of us? It is at the heart of the narrative.
How does a guy survive after losing all of that and make it day to day to day to day?
Being the last person on Earth speaks to the concept of existential loneliness. It speaks to a very terrifying reality for human beings, that we actually are born and we die alone. Morning, Hank. Surviving can be much more of a burden than a blessing sometimes. And part of the beauty is that's how a lot of us feel in life.
When Will and Akiva and I kind of crafted the movie, we wanted to keep elements that made I Am Legend, I Am Legend. One of my favorite ideas in the novel is at the end, Neville discovering, wow, the things that I thought were the monsters aren't really the monsters, I'm the monster. This idea that this creature that he has down in his lab is the, love of the sort of alpha creature that's, stalking him. Then he discovers that if he gives this creature back, this guy may let him live, and he does.
I'm sorry. The same way he saw them as monsters, that's how they saw him. Now, conceptually, that is a spectacular idea. That is the truth of all conflict. but the audience just short of booed. Just like right on the edge of booing. So we went back, and the eventual ending, he sacrificed himself to save the cure. There was something about the difference of science fiction in a novel versus science fiction in the cinema. The genre actually shifts when you add the images.
I Am Legend is a novel which was published in 1954 and is not only one of the most important disease apocalypse story of all time, it is the most influential.
It's had many adaptations. The first adaptation was in the early 60s with Vincent Price.
Another day to live through. Better get started.
Then we had the really popular 70s version called The Omega Man.
If you look at apocalyptic ideas in science fiction, they tend to come in waves, and the 70s was a very strong wave of apocalyptic thinking.
But you're coming out of the 60s and a certain unleashing of human consciousness. So, you know, of course it was going to manifest itself that way.
And after September 11, there's a big resurgence of it.
Sure.
Almost immediately.
Things like I Am Legend, things like there's a big wave of, you know, very, very concerned back to that 70s idea of, you know what, we may well screw this all up.
I'm fascinated by the way that science fiction is always, you know, manifesting our angst, our dreams, and our nightmares.
Every generation has its own version of the apocalypse, some horrible event that basically annihilates a bunch of people all at the same time.
Apocalypses are a big theme in science fiction and always have been. The reason they're interesting is because we always feel like the clock is at 5 minutes to midnight, that the apocalypse is going to come.
The science fiction authors and filmmakers may have given us the ammunition by illuminating for us the dark possibilities, which are now becoming more and more real. I think that one of the most powerful, dazzling, nasty ends for humankind is Planet of the Apes.
The book on which it's based by Pierre Boulle, it's just a vision of another world. But at the end, there's, of course, this famous big reveal that makes your heart turn upside down for a moment when you discover they didn't travel to another planet. Unwittingly, they have traveled to the future of the Earth itself.
Damn you all to hell!
So it turns out to be a story about our own future, about our destiny.
It's a far, far, far future post-apocalypse where humans have been replaced by apes and humans are now kind of dumb animals. Within the first series, but especially in the second series of films, we discover that humanity's demise, it's not just caused by a rain of nukes from the sky, it's not just caused by a zombie pandemic. It's actually a whole bunch of different factors. The hallmark of really good science fiction that stays with us is this idea that the apocalypse is complicated. And this series is a great example of an apocalypse which also has an element of hope in it.
We think of Planet of the Apes as this cynical movie where humans are going to ruin everything. But there's that lovely moment at the beginning. From the very first film, Charlton Heston is speaking aloud to the humans of the future, who he thinks are going to discover him in 700 years. And he says,
You who are reading me now are a different breed. I hope a better one.
And the optimism of that just breaks my heart, especially when you're rewatching the film and you know what happens. It's trying to warn us about what's going to happen if we screw up today. It's almost like you drop a stone in a pool and he wakes up at the 20th ripple, where what's happened in 1972 has ruined the world.
It's frighteningly a promissory note. I think we all watch those movies
Kill them all!
and feel some truth, some inevitability to the idea of it all going away. Us rendering us dispensable and dispensed with.
If you look at all the things that could take us out, overpopulation, climate change, or nuclear war, maybe AI emerges but is used as a weapon.
There won't be one thing.
That's right.
I think dark futures in what we do as entertainment. The engine of that is paranoia.
Yeah, right.
Is it healthy paranoia or unhealthy?
Oh, it's very healthy.
It's healthy because
very
you're constantly saying, what if?
Yeah.
And if you're not saying, what if, you're a fool.
There's so many different kinds of stories that are basically about a really bad future. So there's an apocalyptic story, and then there's dystopia.
How do we come to this? Silent Breed is people!
Dystopia is something went wrong along the way and things are not working out right. And it's about a future looking at a worst case scenario of society where often this is something humans are doing to humans.
Primrose Everdeen. Prim! I volunteer! I volunteer as tribute!
The world of the Hunger Games is a very brutal, hard, dystopic world. You have a tyrannical government, and they are just gonna, at random, once every 4 years, grab one of your kids and make them fight to the death. I think Pete is a great character. I really connected with his idea of, even though this insanity is happening around him and this is like absolute dire circumstances, he still doesn't change who he is.
When entertainment turns into this kind of dark spectacle, it can become an instrument of oppression.
The idea of violence as political distraction comes from Octavian Caesar Augustus, who literally said, give the people bread and circuses. Make sure their bellies are full and they've got something to watch and distract them, then they're not going to take to the streets and protest.
Oh, one of my favorite years, and one of my favorite arenas.
Suzanne Collins, in the creation of the book series, she was flipping channels during one of the wars in Iraq. You know, embedded footage, live, and then you'd flip a few channels and you'd be on MTV watching one of these, you know, reality game shows. And then starting to see these kids battling one another, and then she started to put the two ideas together.
The Hunger Games really hits right at the core of things that we worry about today. Reality TV being something that's more cruel than it is entertaining, but us not even noticing. And the idea of surveillance culture for control has its roots in George Orwell's novel 1984.
1984 is a stunning book and film. Its vision of the future has been used to describe the age we live in since it was published.
With the rise of fascism, the rise of war technologies, suddenly science fiction shifted from optimistic futures to futures that nobody wanted to live in.
Spreading the rumor on order.
Orwell updated totalitarianism for the media age. Things like telescreens and Big Brother show us how surveillance would become part of a technological network.
Now we can see you. Clasp your hands behind your heads.
What was frightening about it is that he didn't insist on a radically new world. He said, look, we can do this with the technology we have now.
The house is surrounded.
Science fiction has never been about predicting the future. It's about choosing a future. It's about the world that we're in now and what direction we take.
Dystopian science fiction grows into the launching pad for social dialogue. And even then, it grows into real-world experience.
We turn to Thailand, where protesters have been inspired by the Hunger Games movie.
A three-finger salute is now a symbol of uprising.
Is the Hunger Games about revolution? It absolutely is.
Suzanne created these stories about war and the consequence of war for teenagers and didn't hold back.
High school feels like the worst kind of dystopia. Someone else is controlling what's possible for you and telling you what to do and where to go and who to be. But in young adult literature, like in the Hunger Games and in Divergent, I think these are stories in which young people, especially young women, have agency and the power to do something about the world around them.
Katniss is this great character and fights in a plausible way.
This is what they do, and we must fight back!
She is given skills that allow her to take down a monster in the form of that society that's so much bigger than her.
The Hunger Games does not end with a pretty little bow on top where the world is just a better place and everybody's happy.
Prim is gone! She's dead! And she's not coming back! Get out!
It takes a lot of casualties and typically a lot of death and a lot of pain to make any kind of change. But the people that remain will always be damaged because those scars definitely remain.
I don't think the human mind is meant to exist in two different dimensions. It's very confusing. You don't know what's real and what's not.
But you know what's real now.
Yes, sir, I do.
The darkest thing about the science fiction of the future is the idea that you might be in the dark future already and not know it.
Where do you draw the line between reality and memory and dreams? And I think the fundamental message of every dystopic sci-fi novel is you're living in a dystopic world and you either see it or you don't.
Now, this is going to be very difficult for you to accept, Mr. Quaid.
I'm listening.
I'm afraid you're not really standing here right now.
You know, Doug, you could have fooled me.
Total Recall was adapted from a short story called We Can Remember It For You Wholesale by Philip K. Dick. And he was the most outstanding, surreal, satirical science fiction writer of the age.
People claim to remember past lives. I claim to remember a different, very different present life.
And there were subsequent Hollywood adaptations of his stories.
I'm placing you under arrest for the future murder of Sarah Marks.
Again and again, characters are thrust into what they learn later is a constructed universe, fooling the people who wander into it into thinking it's actually real.
When we're asleep, our mind can do almost anything.
That's what good science fiction does. It makes you do a double take on reality. And the things you have taken for granted your whole life, it makes you look at them in a new and sometimes very paranoid way.
What the hell?
You can see that Philip K. Dick's ideas are popping up in something like The Matrix. The sense of paranoia, the sense that there's no ground truth to hold on to.
You take the blue pill, you wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
The Wachowskis gave me the script. I read it. This idea of reality not being reality.
This is the world as it exists today.
What's really cool about The Matrix is you get to see what's behind the curtain. The enslavement of humans to support machines.
How do you define real?
So you've got virtual reality and agents and Morpheus. And then Kung Fu. Lawrence Fishburne and I had been training the dojo sequence for about 7-8 months. So it was really exciting to actually be there on the day and start doing it. Because you can train, but then there's the game, right? And then someone says action and it's on, right? I know Kung Fu.
In the synthetic world of The Matrix, we're not limited by our bodies. We're limited just by what we can imagine, which is how you can have these innovations like bullet time.
I think what's really interesting about The Matrix is that it employed special effects in a way that was inherent to the narrative. The reason that bullet time exists in The Matrix is as an exemplar that this is not reality. When you're in The Matrix, you're capable of doing things which you cannot do in the real world. And the first time we see Trinity jump up into that crane pose, we had never seen that before. That was a technology that was effectively invented for that film. And then later on in the film, when you see the bullet time more and more, it becomes the distinguishing feature that tells you you're in the Matrix and you're not in the dystopian apocalypse where we actually exist.
The Matrix certainly is a very exciting film if you're just interested in seeing cool graphics and kung fu. But you can also have all sorts of debates with friends about its philosophical underpinnings.
The Matrix predicted a society where people could just plug in and lose themselves, where people see what they want to see, believe what they want to believe, because it's comfortable and safe, even though it's a lie.
I know this steak doesn't exist. I know that when I put it in my mouth, the Matrix is telling my brain that it is juicy and delicious.
You know, saying, I just want to eat some steak and I want to stay asleep. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really seductive choice, right?
I don't want to remember nothing. Nothing.
The Matrix is perfect science fiction because it has the great moment of personal choice. Do we plug in? And do we just become mindless cogs in a machine? Or do we unplug and choose to live in a world that is cold and dark and complicated and hard and real?
You flirt with science fiction all over the place.
Very much.
I would submit that The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises are actually dystopian science fiction.
Right.
Because you're looking at a hypertrophied, corrupt state.
Yeah, Dark Knight Rises, it's an experience of dystopian future and looking at demagoguery or looking at all these things that can happen.
I think there's an aspect of science fiction that celebrates human potential, where only a hero is your answer, is your salvation.
Yeah, very much.
Oh, you want to play? Come on. Terminated.
The role of the heroes in most dark futures is to defeat the forces that are making these dystopian futures happen.
Dystopian fiction often consider just how much one person can do to change the world around them. It's fighting against a system that has become oppressive and corrupt.
Drop the gun. You are under arrest. Thank you for your cooperation.
RoboCop is a cop who is ultimately turned into a half-man, half-machine, but he's a good cop who believes that there are bad guys, and he's there to stop them.
Ooh, guns, guns, guns!
And I kept thinking about a science fiction story that was kind of set in the business world. You know, it was the 80s, and it was kind of the beginning of the greed generation. So in RoboCop, it was saying that now we live in a world that is really run by money and corporations. And I thought, oh, we should make a movie about how this is inevitable, but maybe you can stop it.
You are under arrest.
RoboCop thinks he's catching one bad guy, and then it turns out the bad guy is even bigger than him. It's a system.
That's the power of sci-fi. It makes it possible to sit there and kind of think about these very big topics while you're watching, you know, robots shoot guys in the penis.
Your move, creep.
The violence of RoboCop is absolutely startling. You know, it shows that this is dystopian. There is something very terrible that has happened to the world to get us to this place.
I'm always a bit amazed that people ask, why is there so much violence in your movies? Then I would answer, why is there not violence in your movies? Violence is built into the universe. And that was for me something that I understood from a, let's say, religious point of view. I felt that the death of Murphy should be a crucifixion. This has to be horrifying, so it had to be extremely violent. I think it works very well. Then slowly you get these electronic movements, and then you start to recognize things. That is the resurrection. I can see the beauty of that story, and I wanted to impose that on the movie. And basically, it came to me the idea that he should walk over the water. And that's what I always felt about RoboCop, that he was the American Jesus.
RoboCop is a political satire, and the realization that this is an allegory for Jesus Christ just shows that we really attach cultural significance to the idea of saviors who sacrifice everything to help us. Science fiction shows us an absolutely dystopian, a horrific future, but we find a beacon of hope from the heroes of a story.
You want to get out of here? You talk to me.
Mad Max, the reluctant anti-hero. Mad Max was like, you hear a piece of music, and you're like, oh my God, where was that been?
George Miller, he was a kid who grew up in Australia, and when he was a teenager, he saw a lot of his friends die in car crashes. And then when he was a doctor, he saw lots of corpses come in that had been mangled from roads. So when George Miller becomes a filmmaker, this idea of telling life and death stories set on roads feels very natural to him.
In the very first movie, society is kind of on the verge of collapsing. And Max, he was a cop, goes sort of insane over the course of the film, trying to stop criminals and losing his family. And then the second movie, Road Warrior, there has been this unexplained nuclear war, and that now gas supplies are incredibly scarce, and that has given way to this post-apocalyptic wasteland that Max is now wandering through.
Mad Max might save the situation, but the world itself just keeps getting worse and worse and worse.
There are certain films that the culture pivots around, and Road Warrior was one of them. As the science fiction writer J.G. Ballard said, it's the Sistine Chapel of punk.
You can run, but you can't hide!
I'm a comic book artist. I write and I draw, and I'm used to words and pictures all the time. So when I got a call from George saying, I've got some stuff on Mad Max I'd like to talk to you about, I said, yeah. In the fourth Mad Max, Fury Road, we had to plot every single thing on that movie, and we did it through nearly 4,000 drawings. We really changed the hero myth as well. In Fury Road, Mad Max, he's much more a product of sort of a post-traumatic stress disorder, and there's nothing to live for except to live. 20 years out in the outback on his own in this beat-up old car. So this guy is like a feral animal. Is placed as a hood ornament on a hot rod. He's used as a blood bag.
That's my property!
Because in Fury Road, the commodity is not oil, it's actually the human body itself.
You're more than welcome to come with us.
I'll make my own way.
I feel like when you watch the Mad Max films, after the first one, he doesn't even see himself as somebody who could be a hero. It's not his world. It's up to women like Furiosa to do the work of actually making it a better place.
They're looking for hope.
What about you?
Redemption.
Furiosa is George's character. That was George saying, I'm going to make a female road warrior, and then she is going to be an icon of the times.
Even though it was a Mad Max movie, it really allowed this heroine character to sort of rise up and almost steal the hero role.
Furiosa is a much more compelling hero than we see with Max. We understand her backstory a lot better and her motivations. She has to protect these women who are trying to escape from a really cruel, terrible slave owner.
Remember me?
There comes a time when Furiosa, being very injured, stabbed in the side, losing vast amounts of blood, and then Max penetrates her with a knife and gives her his blood and mingles it with her. He's now getting invested in spite of himself. As you see the male and the female energy coming together, it was very powerful. And in a way, this is their love scene. And then he leaves.
When you see Furiosa on that platform, rise above this village, you realize this might be the first time where there's a little bit of hope at the end of a Mad Max film.
There's a chance now, a real hope, that a new type of society can be formed by these girls with the muscle of Furiosa. These heroic women will now bring forth a new dispensation to this world. They're going to remake the world that exists in their ideology. What will happen, we don't know, but that's another story.
We as a society hunger for our nightmares writ large on the big screen or the small screen. So it seems to me that's a big part of what science fiction is.
It is.
But as we got into the technological age and the science age, with our fear and our angst of where this was all going, this big human experiment.
We're always worried about where's the world going and is this world coming to an end?
Yeah.
And a lot of science fiction capitalizes on those fears.
Sure.
Can we at least retard the apocalypse and delay it?
Yeah, sound a warning or think twice about a policy.
They're all science fiction, they're cautionary tales. The best science fiction are cautionary tales.
Yeah.
What you're about to watch is a nightmare. It is not meant to be prophetic. It need not happen. But in this place, in this moment, it does happen. This is the Twilight Zone.
The Twilight Zone was the first great science fiction show on television, period.
Beep, 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 beep. I mean, we all think of the 1950s as apple pie placid. But the Twilight Zone offered up the dark side of that.
Everybody's dead except me.
There were always these great twists, and I just loved that. I loved the poignant irony of, oh, he's got all the time in the world with his books, and then he breaks his glasses.
That's not fair.
Before The Twilight Zone, Rod Serling was the great mainstream dramatist of 1950s television, but he was censored at every turn when he wanted to talk about social issues, racial issues, political issues.
I think it's criminal that we're not permitted to make dramatic note of controversial themes as they are inherent in our society.
This dissatisfaction, this frustration led Rod Serling to create a show in which he could talk about the issues, but in a way that the censor and the advertisers wouldn't object.
We are the minorities!
To me, a dystopian story is a warning. This is the way that it can raise its hand and say, hey, everybody, it seems like we might be going in this direction, and look, it won't be good if we go there, so maybe we want to do something about it now.
You're all desperate to point some kind of a finger at a neighbor. But believe me, friends, the only thing that's gonna happen is that we're gonna eat each other up alive.
Anytime you read or watch a dystopic story and you think, well, we're past that now. That couldn't happen.
Look, I swear it isn't me!
Suddenly we're handed a curveball with politics, with issues of the day, and we realize we can always be blindsided.
My name is Offred. I had another name, but it's forbidden now. So many things are forbidden now.
In The Handmaid's Tale, we are plunged into this future world where men are the absolute rulers and women are the underclass. This is a very old-fashioned religious regime. They have special clothing that they wear. They go into supermarkets where nothing is labeled with letters. It feels like an alien place. It feels like another world. And yet we get these constant reminders that, no, this is Boston. But it's a very different world.
I think I fell in love with The Handmaid's Tale because of Offred. Really how she was able to keep up her strength and her belief and her hope in this horrible situation.
God whipped up a special plague.
There's been an environmental disaster, and the fertility rate has gone down precipitously.
No, please don't take her. No!
She's ripped away from her husband and her child. And because Offred is one of the few fertile women left,
This is the new one.
she's kept as a reproductive slave in the house of this commander.
The handmaid shall lie between the legs of the commander's wife. The two of you will become one flower, waiting to be seeded.
We're flowers. Leda. What? It's nice. One thing that I especially love so much about Janine is that everybody thinks she's a lunatic, but she's taken the reality that's been presented to her that she cannot seem to fight and fights it in her own way. Because the only thing that is guaranteed in your future as a handmaid is you will be going to the market and you will be raped.
I didn't put anything into the book that human beings have not already done at some point in history or that they're not doing now. For instance, in Nazi Germany, the SS men had assigned biological wives.
She took directly from horrible atrocities that have been committed against people and put them in her book and just formed them into the world of Gilead.
Margaret Atwood was fascinated with the Salem witch trials and the ways in which women who were considered deviant from the norm were punished. It was about sending a clear message to all women that if you get out of line, the wages of that are death.
The Iranian Revolution was a very interesting analog for Margaret. It was a religious revolution. You know, one day women were wearing miniskirts, and the next day they were kicked out of college, all within 24 hours.
Ladies, you can't work here anymore. It's the law now.
Offred has her job taken away from her and realizes she has no more control over money or property. I think this would have very much resonated with readers in the 1980s because women had just earned the right to own credit cards in their own name in 1974.
You realize that we've been there before. You realize that there, but for the grace of God, could go all of us. It's not that difficult for society to shift just a little bit in order to recreate that dystopian future.
Science fiction pieces often portray the breakdown of society as a warning. You know, it's a lot easier to look back on a TV show and see where the important things happened. It's a lot harder in your life to look back.
When they slaughtered Congress, we didn't wake up. When they suspended the Constitution, we didn't wake up then either. In a gradually heating bathtub, you'd be boiled to death before you knew it.
The idea of the slow burn, that's what makes The Handmaid's Tale so powerful. It's about the evolution of a very small batch of variables that becomes kind of like the butterfly with wings that cause a huge storm.
Why'd they send the army?
I think it's just a warning. I don't think it's a prediction. In the very subtle bits of resistance, that's how the fire stays alive. Because you can take everything away from these women. You take their families away, you take their eyeballs away, but you can't take away their own very unique humanity. That's why you have to stay awake, because otherwise you're left with Gilead.
This may not seem ordinary to you right now, but after a time it will. This will become ordinary.
I'm keeping this group together, alive. We get one thing straight. You're staying. This isn't a democracy anymore.
Post-apocalyptic stories are really about just trying to restart and maybe make a better world if we can.
Can we rebuild society after the apocalypse? You know, you're not going to get color TV back very quickly, but the answer with The Walking Dead is, I hope it can, but not everyone's going to come up with a peaceful way of existing. I wrote the comic about a group of normal, average, everyday human beings trying to survive in the zombie apocalypse and kind of build some semblance of the life that they once knew.
Oh, God.
The real reason you go back on The Walking Dead is because those characters fascinate you. And they are all fighting to find out who they are in a world in which society has been wiped out and the rules have all changed.
Please don't.
Do it, Dad. Do it.
Post-apocalyptic stories always talk about what happens to people and what these people become. And I think that's a classic science fiction theme. And I think that is something that exists in the Romero zombie mythology in his movies.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
George Romero invented the zombie. I mean, the zombie did not exist before George Romero, not in the way we think of the zombie.
George Romero read I Am Legend and loved the concept of being at war with the mindless world. Now, what Romero did, which is critical to modern zombie lore, is Romero put in social commentary.
All right, Vince, hit him in the head, right between the eyes.
The great things about zombie movies, they get into our fear of betrayal, that paranoia that we all have as human beings, that people that we love are going to turn on us. They tap into our fear of a predator. We're afraid of them because they're going to eat us. It has the fear of overpopulation. Oh, and the fear of disease.
The chimps are infected.
The thing that really bugged me about those movies was that you have these really great setups with these interesting characters, and then the time limit runs out on the movie, and as a writer, I was like, oh my God, like, you're really missing an opportunity here. You could follow these people for years and years and years.
I would say after 8 seasons of The Walking Dead, we have probably created over 16,000 Walker makeups. When I was younger, I studied physiology and anatomy quite a bit, and I minored in art. So for me, it's always been important to elevate the level of realism and create something the audience immediately saw as horrific.
I'm sorry this happened to you.
And transform it into something that you felt sympathy for.
The Walking Dead shows the various ways we might rebuild society after an apocalyptic event.
Rick Grimes and his group encountered many different types of civilizations over the course of The Walking Dead. You have a place like Woodbury that's led by the governor. We get to Alexandria, which is a safe haven that was built for people in Washington, D.C. to kind of retreat to. But the worst of the worst when it comes to the societies that we've encountered is Negan and his group, the Saviors.
I'm gonna beat the holy hell out of one of you.
As a writer, you know, sometimes I worry that people think like, oh, well, that guy's just having fun and he's callous. I like killing these people, I'll kill anybody. It's really not that easy for me.
I need you to know me.
When the characters die, like, I get upset the same way that the audience gets upset. I cry sometimes while I'm writing. That's a thing that totally happens. It does wear on me sometimes.
Back to it. There have to be people that keep things in balance morally. Otherwise, it's all chaos. It's all about groups of people that you can trust in terms of making a better future. Everything that they're fighting for is about building a new society. There will be something after.
We have to keep our faith in each other. If we can hold on to that with everything we have, the future is ours.
The Walking Dead captures these amazing little snippets of what human nature is at its best and worst, and when it's tested. And the fact that you might never be redeemed, you may be beyond redemption, but look how many other characters are redeemed in some way.
It is very much about coming from the darkest point and finding a way to work together to bring ourselves up out of that darkness and the rebuilding of civilization. And so to me, on a long enough timeline, it's a very uplifting story about people who have lived through the worst of the worst and have become the best of the best. And so I've always looked at it as an optimistic story.
Science fiction is talking about the human condition. It's ridiculous to say good and evil, but I think the idea of competitive, aggressive versus compassionate, empathic, you know, and we have both.
Yep.
And nature has selected for both in a way, because we're social beings. We didn't get to survive without taking care of our kids and learning how to hunt together and all the things that we give and share with each other.
And we all have empathy, and we're mindful, and we have deep sympathy, even if we don't act that way in our lives or people don't see that in us. Everybody has that capacity.
Right.
And that is the capacity, I think, that will always pull us back from the brink.